Hello and welcome to the latest edition of our Voices in the Field podcast series, brought to you by the AP Sports Management Program. My name is Jim Reese, and I'll be your host for today's podcast. Now, please welcome our special guest, Mr. Billy Beane, Senior Advisor for the Oakland Athletics. And if you're a sports fan and you don't know who Billy Beane is, you've probably been living under a rock for quite some time. So I think everyone in sports knows Billy. So Billy, welcome. It's thanks for taking time to be here.
No, thanks for having me, Jim. And given the audience, I'm sort of proud to be a part of this conversation. So thanks for the invitation. And again, I think the audience itself is something that's very near and dear to myself. So again, happy to be here.
So Billy, just briefly, we know that you were a GM with the A's, and now you're a senior advisor for the team, and we know you played Major League Baseball. So just a little bit about your path there. Did you consider that a traditional path to becoming a general manager, or were there some different steps in there that were non-traditional?
The path I took was the route most general managers took. It was really a very, I want to use the word incestuous business. And you played the game, or you came up in the game or the business, and you ultimately ran the business. We really didn't hire many people outside. So my route was traditional. What was interesting, though, was my business mentor's route was the one that was non-traditional, and that was Sandy Alderson. Again, most general managers were former players or people who'd been in the business. And Sandy Alderson, however, was a former Dartmouth undergrad, was a Marine lieutenant in Vietnam, and then went to Harvard Law School when he exited the Marines. And his background was actually non-traditional. Again, he was not a player. He taught himself the game by reading books. And so he was really the first one to really question some of the things that were going on, because the traditions of running the business were just things that were handed down, where when he came in, a lot of them didn't make sense to me. So I was really lucky to have, first of all, a guy who was a brilliant businessman, but more importantly, had great leadership skills. I think a lot of it came from his experience in the military and his background. And it's also very unique from a military standpoint. There's not too many Marine lieutenants who were in Vietnam. They also went to Harvard Law and graduated near the top of their class. It's a pretty dynamic profile for a business mentor. So mine was more traditional. Again, the route now to being a general manager is much different than mine was. If you look at the biographies of guys running the team now, most of them came up like Sandy, sort of educated, go through college, have some leadership skills, not necessarily acquired through the military like Sandy. But there's very few players now running teams. When I came up, that was the majority of them were, again, ex-players. So I actually had a traditional. And I'd like to think in some respect, and I give Michael Lewis a lot of credit to the people I hired, the route changed and the backgrounds changed a lot, once data and analytics were used to make player evaluations.
And that's a perfect segue, because that was one of the next questions from one of our students. We know the difference in the markets and the luxury tax and all that kind of stuff. And it must be incredibly difficult each year to lose good players to other teams. But obviously that was what got started with Sandy as far as the sabermetrics. But what was your initial reaction? Because that's a huge step. I mean, you're talking career ending, entrepreneurial, start a business. It's so different. How did you feel about that, and what was it that pushed you to take the plunge finally?
Well, it's funny. I'm proud of my own personal background. Listen, I'm very proud to have played the major leagues. There's so few people who get that opportunity. And, when you're in the major leagues, you're one of the 600 best in the entire world at what you do. Despite my sort of pedestrian career, what it did was really, and I always viewed it this way, playing the game was never the end all for me, because I realized even had I become a great major league player, it really takes up a small part of your life that, you've got usually from 30, 35 on the rest of your life to live. So you've usually got to find something else to do. So for me, I saw it as a platform to do what I really, really wanted to do as a kid. I wanted to, run a team, which I ended up doing. And in some respect, I also wanted to be sort of part of the ownership and the value creation that came with having a partial ownership, which I ultimately was able to achieve. So again, taking the plunge and then not playing, I stopped playing. My first daughter was soon to be born. It seemed like an inflection point for me from my life. I had the opportunity to work with probably the most progressive and dynamic front office with Sandy Alderson, and on the field we also had Tony La Russa, who was on his way to creating a Hall of Fame career and also being somewhat of an iconoclast in the way he did things. So it was a really, really fertile environment to segue into being a player and into the front office. So it didn't seem like much of a leap. And in fact, I tell this story many times. I don't think that I've actually swung a baseball bat from the day I stopped playing, which is in the spring of 1990. And I've never missed it. Again, playing had actually provided me with the opportunity to do something I could do the rest of my life and something I was very passionate about. And in some sense also sort of satisfied my intellectual curiosity. So when I was 28 years old and I embarked on it, I have never looked back, and it's easy to say now, but I never regretted the decision. I've been very fortunate. I think success comes in, for a lot of reasons. A lot of it, as the individuals, a lot of it, you can have great people around you. That's why I think having a mentor, I always say that, finding a mentor, somebody that you not only respect intellectually, but respect ethically and morally. For me, I had that. And, I was also blessed with having parents who were the same way. So, and I just sort of segued into, Sandy Alderson. And so I was real lucky. I had great people around me that helped. And it wasn't all because of me. I'd like to think I was just I played a part in it, obviously, but for me, it was an easy decision to stop playing. Again, I'm doing now, we're having this conversation, and I know we're going to talk a little bit later what some of the things I'm doing now, but I've never been bored a day in my life because there's just so many things that I think it really stems from having, again, using the term intellectual curiosity, wanting to learn a lot about things, and there's always a new challenge. And as I get older, I realize that people talk about retiring, and I say, well, I don't ever see myself retiring because even if I wasn't working, there's so many things, whether it be fly fishing or, whatever, that I just find interesting. And so I just don't think there'll be enough days in my life to take advantage of all the great things that are out there.
It's funny that you said that because I said one of the same things over all the time, over and over. People ask me what I do, and I say, I get paid to talk about sports. And it's the best job in the world. And you get to build relationships with students. It's just a wonderful, and I thought it sounds like we're both extremely blessed to be doing what we love to do. And that's what you want for any of your family members or students, to find that passion. So it's great to hear that. The other thing too is mentors is, I try to tell students to seek out mentors because as you have, I've had a few in my life that made a huge impact. And you just can't put a value on that. They take you under their wing and kind of guide you a little bit and then turn you loose. And it's really special. I probably have 3 or 4 in my entire life that have impacted me like that. So I always tell students, and hopefully they'll do that, is, find someone that, you described the characteristics of a mentor, find someone like that and be a sponge and try to learn as much as you can. All right, next question. This was one from a student as well. Of the different metrics, was there one that jumped out to help you find that, I don't want to say not non-traditional players, but the overlooked player? Were there certain ones that were more valuable than others, or was it just a score, a total score that helped you do that?
That's easy. Now, understand, all of this has changed significantly in the last 20 plus years with technology and the ability to collect data and information. But when we first started out, and I let it be known too, any of the success we've had or any of the ideas we have, particularly the ideas, were nothing proprietary or were they anything we invented. I sort of say this, but if you've read the book Moneyball, every idea in there was one we stole from Bill James. I sort of say that jokingly, but our industry sort of allowed us to. And when I say Bill James is sort of one of the baseball academics that have been around for years. Guys like him and Pete Palmer and Earnshaw Cook have been writing like, listen, there's a more efficient way to sort of deploy capital, and there's statistics at that time that actually mean something. It was on base percentage, and that was the one we latched onto. And the reason it was important to us was, first of all, on base percentage of all the statistics. Now, this is in the 90s, actually up into the 90s. Now, again, the metrics and the stuff we're using now is far more sophisticated. But simply put, the most important statistic at that time was, as it relates to correlating to winning baseball games, was on base percentage. That and starting pitching ERA. Well, the difference between the two is that, and you mentioned sort of, talking about teams, with bigger teams and smaller teams, is that everybody who follows a baseball team knows that pitching's important. And the market realized that. So the most expensive players were starting pitchers. Now in Oakland, we had the smallest payroll, so we couldn't afford starting pitching. So for us, on base percentage became It was really a skill that was undervalued and underappreciated and quite frankly, priced to the point where we could afford it. And it was the most important one. So imagine any business where the most important thing you can do is actually very cheap and cost effective because the rest of the industry or the rest of your peer group isn't valuing it to the level they should. That's simply put what we did was we basically collected, we had a small amount of chips that we could invest in players. We used all those chips fortunately, to invest in the most important stat and skill. And the benefit to us is it was probably the 9th or 10th highest paid skill. So we could afford it. That's kind of what the book was about. And this was all public information. It was just nothing we invented. Bill James had been writing for years that teams should be doing that. And that's what I'm talking about. Sort of the game was very insulated in that we hired our own so that guys like Bill James were on the outside. You know, they were baseball academics that nobody listened to. They were professors of baseball. And at the time, most people just dismissed them. And one of the reasons they did, in my opinion, was they could. Baseball is a little different than most businesses. If you don't adapt in most businesses, you're going to either go out of business or somebody's going to come and gobble you up and take you over. Baseball, if you have a poor season, you just hit the reset button. You really don't go bankrupt. You just get to start over again. And in many ways, that sort of kind of puts a damper on creativity because you're not forced. Creativity, in my opinion, comes out of necessity many times. You know, I don't think people just wake up in a business that's successful and go, hey, let's be really cute and creative here. They do it because they're trying to find a way to survive. And baseball never was really required to do that because, again, you could have a bad year and you might lose your job if you're a general manager, but your business is not going to collapse because you make poor decisions by and large. So getting back to your original question, it was really simply put, it was on base percentage. Again, that's changed significantly now. What teams are doing now is so sophisticated, and really driven by more sophisticated and better ways to collect data. As a result of having all this data, this raw data, you hire really, really bright people to turn it into information that can help you. Because really what we're in the game of doing as a general manager is predicting player performance, finding the next player and trying to predict what he's going to do and pricing it accordingly. It's a market in some sense. It's a market for skills. These skills are, baseball players, and they also have a career arc and a curve. And so you've got to sort of predict when you're going to get surplus value or when that value is going to decrease based on maybe aging and things like that. So, and nowadays we use data and very sophisticated tools to do that. But back then it was very, very crude.
It just makes me think of that one clip in the movie when they're in the conference room and with the scouts, and they're talking about on base percentage. That's just a funny part of the movie. So that is very interesting. And it is way more sophisticated now. There seems to be a statistic for just about everything, which didn't exist previously. So
yeah, well, you mentioned statistic. It's interesting because for us, statistics were results. And the next generation, and we're even farther past that, was we realized that statistics and results weren't necessarily, all results aren't equal, but they may be graded equally using statistics. And we wanted to ultimately create player performance models that measured process, because we felt like process was a much better predictor of future performance. I give an example. 20 years ago when the book came out, if a player broke his bat and hit a single, he was positively rewarded because his batting average went up, which was a statistic, despite the fact that a process that breaks your bat is usually one that doesn't lead to continued success. And so that was a gap. And on the flip side, you had a player who maybe hit a line drive to the third baseman that hit it 110 miles an hour. The guy made an unbelievable play, and he was penalized for that process, which, again, normally would have resulted in a positive outcome if he consistently does it. What ultimately happened over the course of time after the book came out is teams were able to create their own proprietary models to really start to measure process because that was a better indicator. And there was a gap between statistics and process. And I say this, and I don't say this because I'm trying to be humble or anything like that, but the group of people who run baseball teams now are far brighter than I'll ever be and have taken it to such levels. I'm proud to be a part of the story, but the idea that the GMs now, I say this too, they're smart enough to be leaders in almost any industry. They're that bright where the game is now in fact, if you think about it, the game has come so far in terms of its intelligence that they've literally had to change the rules because of the impact of analytics. And to me, that's in a weird way, that shows you how smart the group of people are. 30 teams out there, none of these teams are run by people who are not extremely, extremely bright and good at what they do. There's no bad GMs anymore. There's some who may be better, and there's some who may have better resources, but all the guys out there right now, I can just tell you, they are brilliant, passionate, and surrounded by equal brilliance as well.
I'm glad they changed that shift rule.
The shift is a great example. I'm glad you brought that up. So for roughly 150 years, people played their defenses one way. And then a bunch of really smart guys came in and said, you guys have been doing it wrong for the last 150 years. And no matter how awkward it looks on the field, this is how we're going to play the defense. And you know what? It proved to be incredibly effective. And I always say this, the shift is really a bunch of really smart young people coming to the game and showing us how dumb I was for 150, or all of us were for 150 years. Like, hey, there's a better way to do it. And they had to change the rules because it was so effective.
And the fans didn't like it because it led to less offense. And so everything is about scoring and keeping people, jumping out of their seats. So,
it's interesting. My normal path is I don't necessarily like the idea of creating regulations when something's successful. I like the idea of hiring smarter people to beat the shift. That's sort of the way I would view. I'm sort of Adam Smithian, when it comes to stuff like that. But I just think ultimately that someone will find a way to beat that shift. But I think I saw somewhere the stat that if you hit a home run over the fence, no shift's going to stop that, right? So that wasn't eliminated. I think somebody said it eliminated like 11 singles, or it basically eliminated a few ground ball base hits, things like that. So again, while it was effective, I think that the idea is that you really just, again, stop guys from getting a few singles. Because if a guy hits a homer over the fence, there's literally nothing you can do and no rule you can do to stop that.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back with our special guest, Mr. Billy Beane.
At American Public University, we believe higher education is not one size fits all. That's why we offer 200 modern programs that build on your knowledge and fit your schedule. Because we believe universities should adapt to the needs of students, not the other way around. American Public University, within reach, without limits. Online classes start every month. Learn more at AmericanPublicU.com.
Thanks for staying with us. We're back with today's guest, Mr. Billy Beane. Let's get back to the discussion. I used to always love it when someone would bunt because you got half of the infield is wide open and these guys wouldn't bunt. So when someone finally did, I loved it because there's a way you can beat it. So,
of course, many teams would tell you they'd rather have Ortiz try and lay down a bunt and at best get a single than to hit one over the wall. So for them, it was a way of sort of managing that at bat with Ortiz. Hey, we'll give you the bunt because we'd rather have you hit a single than hit one over the wall. But laying down a bunt, interesting you said, it's a skill that a lot of players lost or stopped, creating for themselves.
It's a lost art.
Yeah, lost. Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on I don't like to call it an art because I'm not a huge fan of the bunt. It can be effective in the role that you're talking about because it becomes an offensive play. I'm less of a fan when it becomes a give up and out for an extra base. To your point, I think that the lost art is of using it offensively, not as a way of just, again, gaining an extra base, which I find to be actually mathematically, it's just normally it's not a good idea.
I agree 100%. This next question is, you touched on this when you talked about the group that you had together in Oakland and how everyone was kind of willing to do some different things. In a lot of situations, you've got a general manager that can't put together a team that he wants to because of different influences, and it could be a coach, it could be an owner. Is there a certain mix of communication there that allows GMs to do a better job versus not being able to be successful?
Yeah, it's actually a good question, and one I don't think people think about a lot, but one of the advantages we had in Oakland, we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of autonomy. Usually when people who have a lot of money buy a baseball team, very rarely do they just go turn it over to mid-level employees like myself and say, hey, I know I spent $1 billion in this, go have fun with it. They buy it because they love sports too. Who can blame them? If they choose to buy a team and they want input, then they have every right to do that. They've sort of purchased that right. That being said, one of the advantages we had was we did have autonomy. As I say, we had a budget and we just had to stay inside that budget. We didn't have a lot of interference other than don't spend more than we give you. Actually, a good environment to work with despite the limitations financially. And so in some sense, I think any GM would tell you, in a perfect world, you have the financial support of your owner with pure autonomy, but those doesn't exist all the time. I mean, and some owners are very much out there in terms, we know who they are. I mean, certainly one of the most famous was a guy like George Steinbrenner, who was very involved, not just publicly, but he was also very successful. He invested a lot, and he felt like, listen, if I'm going to invest this kind of money, then I want to say what's going on. But I think anybody in any industry would tell you, particularly if they don't actually own the entire entity, that as long as they sort of get to do their job, I'm sure I know the military is the same thing. Just the ability to do the job and not feel like you're being micromanaged by bureaucracy above you who may or may not have experience in your field of expertise. And that was it. So we did have that advantage with our ownership. They left us alone. They just didn't give us a lot. But given the two, listen, we were able to sort of thrive with very little, but with the autonomy we were able to take advantage of.
You guys definitely made the best of what you had available, for sure. Back to your career path. One of the questions we get from students all the time is, how do I become a GM? And you mentioned that yours was traditional and now a lot of them are non-traditional. So there's no real straight path. I guess there's just a lot of what you think, but just getting as much experience as you can in different areas and then taking advantage of opportunities when those doors open.
Again, I explained a little of mine, which was at the time traditional. And then with the sort of advent and the utilization of analytics, we really became sort of like the backgrounds that we were hiring were STEM. I mean, we were looking for the same sort of resumes that Silicon Valley was looking for, that Wall Street was looking for. We were competing with them for the same employees. That really has been the case in the last 15 or 20 years. I think the other thing that's really starting to come into play is that if you are going to be a general manager, it is a leadership position. And that is interface with your employees and providing great leadership in many different ways. It's not just a sort of a ruthless quantitative position, because you do have to lead people and you're dealing with the press, you're dealing with fans. Because even if you're not going to, as I say, make the sausage and create the models, it's certainly going to help that you understand them. So that's a lot of the background. But again, the leadership now, I think you realize how important it is to not only have an understanding of how these models and how the analytics are being used, but also having the leadership ability, that combination. So to get your question, I said it's very competitive, as you can imagine, because, I mean, sports, everyone, at some level has some experience and maybe some passion for sports. But I've also found, too, despite the fact that we've had, I mean, listen, the Ivy League, I hired Paul DiPodesta, who was in the movie, and he was a Harvard econ major. And then we very much there was a lot of guys sort of with Paul's background that came in after him. But also I've seen the backgrounds of some of my best employees are ones that are very, ones that you would never expect. In fact, quite frankly, it's less so the background is less important. The opportunity, once you get it, is most important. And you mentioned the military too. We've had opportunities where we've had people who've come to work with we had a West Point graduate who came and interned for us after, his service was done, which is always fascinating. I mean, it would be neat actually if we had even more people from the military apply, because it's such unique. And, when you talk about leadership skills, there's probably no better training ground than that. And the life experiences. And those mean something, even with a baseball team, and listen, if there's one thing I can say, having been around professional athletes, the one thing that really makes them sort of listen is people who've served the country and stuff like that. I mean, that's when their ears are wide open. So in some sense, it is cool. And it's cool to get those resumes and just getting the opportunity, having a chance to basically display your skills, whether they're quantitative skills, communication skills. But I think more than anything, I've said this, we go back to the mentor thing. Search out somebody that you really like to see yourself and you admire for, and sort of search the person out as opposed to searching out for the job. Because if you're hired what you think is your dream job and you have the less than dream guy above you, that doesn't turn out as well as maybe the not so good job that has the dream mentor. I'll take that combination any day. And so again, I say search out people and the job will figure itself out. That's my own experience. I was lucky to have that. I spent my entire career with one of the smallest baseball teams. With opportunities to leave, and I never regretted it, because it ended up being about not only the people I worked for in Sandy Alderson, but ultimately the people I hired that stayed around me, that created an atmosphere for myself that I never wanted to leave, despite the fact that we had challenges that maybe other teams didn't have.
You may regret saying what you just said, because you're going to get flooded with resumes from our military alumni. So students, are you listening? Are you listening to Billy? Okay.
Yeah, my father started, I think in another life, he would have been an Apple engineer. It all started out with him as a teenager, enlisting in the Navy and become a jet engine mechanic, which doesn't sound all that really sort of exciting. He loved it, quite frankly, and just sort of built upon that to create a really interesting, fascinating life. And to this day, if I need something fixed, I call my dad. So to this day, and he always knows the answer. And again, to me, it started out with his training in the military as a jet engine mechanic, and when he was stationed at Miramar.
We have a guy in our neighborhood like that, and he just thinks like an engineer. He like MacGyver's everything, but it always works. It's just, Bob can do anything. All right, this was an interesting question from one of our students. How did you develop an interest in soccer?
That's a great question. Well, it really started on a trip. I was in London, it's been over 20 years ago, and was on a little quick trip for my wife's birthday. I couldn't figure out where to get her for her birthday, and then they had these really cheap flights over to London. So we went to London, and I was there during the football season. Premier League was relatively new. And I was reading, breakfast, and they have like sort of tabloid style newspapers and headlines. And quite frankly, I saw the emotion that surrounded the sport. And the other thing, ironically, soccer, the FA is in England, is about as old as baseball. So you had a very sort of similar history and a similar tradition to the way you did things. And I saw the emotion. And my first thought was like, wow, if there's this much emotion surrounding the game, there's probably a lot of opportunity to make rational quantitative decisions. So that's kind of how it started. As time went on, I sort of grew to love the sport, the athleticism that comes with it. And the other thing too, as I've gotten older and become more and more involved, I've also said, the one great thing about it is that it's the biggest sport in the world. There's got to be a reason. That was also another reason for my curiosity. But to really go see great soccer football teams, you get to go some of the coolest cities in the world. And I thought that was another byproduct of, you go to London, you're going to Rome, you're going to Paris and Munich. And so it's just something that over time has grown. The world's become smaller. Even now in the States now, or 20 years ago, you couldn't see soccer football games weren't on TV. Now you can find them anywhere. And so I'd like to think I was a little bit ahead of the curve on that, but my interest started more from a business standpoint. It turned into a love of the sport. And subsequently, since then, I've had ownership stakes in some European clubs in terms of operations. And I suspect going forward, it will continue to be the case. As you mentioned, I'm a senior advisor now, not handling the day-to-day with the A's. And I see sort of a second part of my professional career being even more involved, not just in soccer, but in European and international sports in general.
I've noticed from a grassroots level that soccer, because it's so inexpensive to play, it's just exploded at the youth level. And so I think I guess it would be trickle up, not trickle down, but I think that's going to help our athletes from the United States be more competitive at some point. So we'll see if that happens. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like you, I mean, when the international tournaments come, we all sort of rally around the national team. And listen, there are some good young American players, and especially now it's neat to see them going abroad and playing in Europe and competing in the bigger leagues. Christian Pulisic's at Milan, and a number of players are in Italy and all around. So I think the more that the younger players go out and play in the best leagues in the world, it's going to ultimately help the national team, because I think everyone can acknowledge that there's certainly a lot of great athletes and a lot of great young soccer players here. And ultimately becoming one of the best in the world is what we'd all like to see. And certainly in my lifetime, I'd like to see it. And I'm hoping that'll be the case.
Exactly. I think we all would aspire to that. So, all right. Now, this last one, you've touched on this a little bit with soccer. This is my question that I usually end every podcast with. What's next for Billy Beane? What do you have? What are you working on? And where do you see yourself being involved in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I've still got a couple kids that I got to get out of the house. So I got boy and girl still at home, an older daughter soon to get married. Professionally, as mentioned a little bit, I'm very involved in, we have some ownership interest and some operating interest in some soccer teams in Europe. We also have some, as I mentioned, international sports. We have an investment in a cricket team in India, believe it or not. Some of the partners also have invested in some F1 and Formula One. And again, for me, they're all new sports and new businesses. Some of them have similarities to baseball. I think, listen, some business ideas translate to other businesses, and there's some things that are unique about each business. But more than anything, I just find them really interesting. And I would say that as I get older, that more and more of my time is spent on international sports and investing as well in those sports. And again, the last couple of years, I've again sort of segued out of baseball in the day-to-day. I still have a passionate interest because my closest friends are still involved in the business. But it's nice not to, as I say now, no matter how long you do it, there's something to be said when you're playing 162 baseball games and your mood is dependent upon that team winning the night before. After 20 plus years, it starts to wear on you a little bit. So it's kind of nice to not, I still live and die with my A's results, but not to the level when you're operating it day to day. So it's kind of nice to kind of get off that treadmill a little bit and be involved and still passionately, but in a different way now. And my passion now is the success of the people that I worked with for years. David Forrest, who's running the A's on a day-to-day basis. Hired David 24 years ago. He's not only a brilliant young executive, but he's also one of my closest friends. So my stress level is really just rooting for him and hoping that he puts together good teams for his benefit and the people that were there when I left.
My gosh, what a roller coaster ride that must be. But, just living and dying on the results of all of those games over a season. I can't imagine what that would be like.
You have no idea.
No, I don't.
I see it in younger GMs now. Listen, there's nothing you don't even know what's happening. I mean, it really is an intense business. I know as exciting as it is, it sounds fun, but when those results mean something, it can be very stressful for people. And you have so many different dynamics in sports that you don't have in other businesses. You basically have quarterly earnings, but it's every night. People are evaluating you and your team every single night based on the result. There's just very few businesses that have that sort of pressure and that kind of stress. And so the people who run these teams are beyond bright. They're also very unique in terms of emotionally stable enough to handle the ups and downs that come with running a baseball team. Good. It's one thing, an NFL team, you win on a Sunday and you're in a good mood for a week. In baseball, you win on a Monday night, you might be playing Tuesday afternoon. And if you win, you got about 12 hours to enjoy it. Then it starts over again. So it's very unique, and as much satisfaction, it's also incredibly stressful.
You just made me appreciate my job that much more. So thank you for that. Billy, listen, our students, this is for them, and we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, but we just appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom for our students. I think they're really going to enjoy this. So
I'm flattered to be a part of what you guys are doing, Jim, and the best of luck to all the people who've taken the time to listen to this and be a part of this conversation in some way.
For the listeners, thank you for your continued support of our Voices in the Field podcast series. We've had some requests from our students for someone in motorsports. So our next guest is going to be Jason Golden. He's the Chief Revenue Officer for Richard Childress Racing. We're really looking forward to that. Until then, this is Jim Reese from the AP Sports Management Program saying so long.